Pennsylvania at 580 miles per hour, about 20 minutes flight time from Washington, D.C. Girard's objective, concludes the commission, was to crash the airliner into symbols of the American Republic, the Capitol, or the White House. Question. Given that they were only 20 minutes away from Washington, and for almost 6 minutes, why didn't the hijackers continue flying towards the Capitol? And even if they thought they couldn't make it to Washington, why didn't they try to crash the plane onto a small town nearby? Why crash the plane in an empty field where they knew they could not kill any more victims than those that were already on the plane with them? Maybe a less fictional explanation for Flight 93 is the one offered by Vernon Gross, author and former NTSB investigator.
The role the government plays in times of stress, how they view the public. Can the public stand the truth? Or shouldn't we need a legend at this point. We need a really neat story of reacting against such a dastardly act as was happening. So it's really nice and convenient to think of the Beamer story, let's roll. And that becomes just like the Alamo. And it's just one of those legends. And I think there'd be a lot of pressure to let the legend stay where it is.
If we now summarize Flight 93, we have no proof whatsoever that the terrorists boarded the plane, nor that they were ever in the cockpit. An alleged hijacker who could not have flown an airliner in the way that Flight 93 was flown. A false, concurrent hijacking that called the attention away from the real one. No proof whatsoever that Flight 93 crashed in the field near Shanksville. An extended debris field, which flatly disproves the official version of the crash and suggests that the plane broke up in mid-air instead. An unexplained small white jet leaving the area right after the impact. And the fact that the passengers who called from their cell phones could not have been on that plane to begin with, which strongly suggests their revolt was a scripted, fictional event intended to fuel a prefabricated legend.
CLB. We all in the same film.
For most Americans, the destruction of the Twin Towers will remain embedded in their memories and their hearts as the epitome of horror, astonishment, and unjustified human suffering.
You can do it really,
But for some, it may have represented their large corporate interests of global reach and cynical economic greed found a perfect place for a secret encounter.
You take the video, right?
Attacks destroyed
and then again, all Or make it better again, and then I send it back to you.
While they sat on some of the most valuable real estate in the
And
world,
find
for
the
30 years,
thing
the Twin
gone.
Towers had become obsolete. With each of the floors built as an open space of almost 1 acre in size, the rising cost of energy had made it extremely expensive to keep the buildings warm in winter and cool in summer. General maintenance was also very expensive compared to buildings from more recent years. In his 1999 book on the Twin Towers, Divided We Stand, author Eric Gartner wrote, when the World Trade Center was bombed in February 1993, it was already passing its prime as office space, overtaken by a generation of more recent, cybernetically smart buildings with bigger ceilings and greater built-in electrical capacity. To maintain the Trade Center as Class A office space commanding top rents, the Port Authority would have had to spend $800 million rebuilding its electrical, electronic communications, and cooling systems. Furthermore, after the 1993 bombing, the tenancy had dropped dramatically, and it had been very hard to bring it back to normal levels. But the biggest problem with the Twin Towers was the large amount of asbestos they contained. Built in a time when the use of asbestos was still allowed in civil construction, at least 400 tons of this extremely dangerous material had been used to fireproof the steel structure of the buildings and to insulate hundreds of miles of pipings for water, heating, and air conditioning. Asbestos was also present in the ceiling panels, the elevator shafts, and the vinyl tiles from office floors. From a property condition assessment of the Twin Towers dated December 2000, we read, according to Port Authority records, a total of 7 million square feet of vinyl asbestos floor tiles were installed in the World Trade Center. By the time asbestos was banned from civil construction, the Twin Towers were nearing their completion. Initially, the asbestos was encapsulated wherever possible to prevent the particles from being inhaled. But in the 1990s, the regulations grew tighter, and every time a simple renovation was needed, the complete removal and replacement of the asbestos was also required. At the same time, because of the health risk it posed, the cost of asbestos removal and abatement had been skyrocketing. Safety procedures required the areas to be treated to be vacated in advance, hermetically sealed, and kept under negative pressure at all times to prevent particles from escaping outside. Only specialized workers could access the area, wearing airtight suits and respirators. A full decontamination process was required every time they left the area. In the mid-90s, the Port Authority put out different bids for the removal and replacement of the asbestos in a case-by-case scenario. For example, this is a 1995 contract for the installation of 2 low-voltage substations in Towers 1 and 2.
Towers for the ashes like clay with lazy bombs. And ever since we're getting more like genius, calm and business for a fascist world state. And already a nightmare, we're right to strip bare, get prepared for the future on. Wide tap, cameras on every corner, black water sharp shooters with scopes locked on ya. The Patriot Act pilots watching our backs, they front like they're here to save us while they're on the attack and react. Like a tendency coming from a nation built by theft and genocide, gunning down opposition. Listen, we're right, it's well known, but America will eat its own. So long to what you got with the credit. These times are catastrophic, cause war is a means of profit.
Off on a walk. That makes me good.
Waiting. Oh.
Did 93. Given the controversy, they left on the ground in Shanksville before vanishing with everything else into thin air. And this is the center of the hole, which is supposed to have swallowed practically the whole fuselage. But this is where the official story of the crash becomes truly fascinating. According to the FBI, after 2 weeks of excavation in Shanksville, 95% of the plane had been recovered. A Boeing 757 weighs roughly 100 tons. A mid-sized car weighs about 2,500 pounds, a ton and a half. This means that, according to the FBI, the equivalent of at least 50 to 60 cars was actually excavated from the ground. Question: can you explain how most of an airplane weighing 100 tons could end up buried deep underground in a hole that closed itself up before the first responders arrived? But even if it were true that 95% of the plane has been recovered, where is it? Why have we never been shown it? When a controversial accident happens, all efforts are made to recover as many pieces of the plane as possible. These, for example, are the remains of the flight from Lockerbie, which have been pieced together in a hangar. These are the remains of TWA 800, the flight that crashed in the ocean near Long Island in July 1996. These are the remains of Itavia 800, which crashed in unclear circumstances near Ustica, Italy in 1980. Why wasn't the same thing done with United 93? Given the controversy on the absence of debris, coupled with the rumors of possible shoot-down, it would have been the perfect way for all conspiracy theories to rest. Instead, we are told all the recovered parts of the plane have been sequestered by the FBI, and no one has ever been able to see them. As far as we know, Flight 93 might have never crashed in Shanksville to begin with. There is another problem for those who support the official version. When an airplane crashes to the ground, a plume of thick black smoke rises to the sky and continues to burn until all the fuel is consumed. But instead of being faced by something like that, this is what the people in Shanksville saw. It looked like a mushroom cloud, he said. But under the cloud, there is no plume of black smoke rising to the sky. And the mushroom shape is the classic result of a bomb explosion.
Or what's
The local reporter also
Oh, I see that over here. I see the video.
and the odor of scorched earth instead.
And there's a very strong odor of the scorched earth. The only way I can describe it. It doesn't smell like jet fuel. It smells like, Kendall, how do you describe it? Just burned earth. Burned earth. It smells like burned earth.
The grass next to the hole also indicates there was no fire after the explosion, as it appears perfectly dry and untouched all around. Some have suggested that this is only the initial explosion, and that the plume of black smoke hasn't started to rise yet. But this hypothesis is disproven by this video, taken by a local amateur shortly after the explosion took place.
Crash over on Lambertsville Road.
As one can see, the initial cloud floats in the air, but the typical plume of black smoke rising from below is not there.
I don't know anything.
If we fast forward the video, we can see that the situation doesn't change much. After more than 1 minute, the initial cloud is still there, but there is no black smoke whatsoever rising from below. Question. Since the plane was carrying 8 to 10,000 gallons of fuel at the time of impact, can you explain why there is no plume of black smoke rising from the ground after the initial explosion? But the toughest problem for the supporters of the official version is to explain how different parts of the
Lake a couple miles away at the same time that the plane was crashing.
The lake Bunch is talking about is Indian Lake, which is located a couple of miles southeast of the crash site. According to the debunkers, there is a valid explanation for the debris found in the lake.
Perché quello che dice di pezzi trovati in questa zona sono arrivati a Indian Lake, che è a 1600 metri di distanza. Sono stati trovati pezzettini di carta che sono volati perché c'è vento.
First of all, it's not true that there was wind on that day. As the images show, there was only a light breeze gently moving the air all around. The very cloud from the explosion, as we have seen before, practically didn't move for over 1 minute. Secondly, it wasn't just small pieces of paper that were found. From the Pittsburgh Tribune, we read, by Wednesday morning, crash debris began washing ashore at the marina. Witness John Flegel said there was something that looked like a rib bone amid pieces of seats, small chunks of melted plastic, and checks. In any case, the problem is not limited to Indian Lake, which is 2 miles away from the crash site. Debris from the plane was found as far as 8 miles away in New Baltimore. This is the map of the debris field published by the Pittsburgh Tribune. CNN also reported the secondary field, confirming that the debris belonged to Flight 93.
Well, Darren, in the last hour or so, the FBI and the state police here have confirmed that they have cordoned off a second area about 6 to 8 miles away from the crater here where this plane went down. This is apparently another debris site, which raises a number of questions. Why would debris from the plane, and they identified it specifically as being from this plane, why would debris be located 6 miles away? Could it have blown that far away? Seems highly unlikely. And as to whether it broke up on the way, we don't know that. FBI is being very tight-lipped about that. But again, it leads to that possibility. It certainly leads to a number of questions.
Since the plane is supposed to have hit the ground in one piece, can you explain how it was possible for debris to be found 6 to 8 miles from the crash site on a day when only a light breeze was blowing? The extension of the debris field is not the only fact suggesting a shoot down. There are other elements that seem to confirm it.
Stand there watching on TV and the lights flickered in the building. And we heard the engines roar. And we took off out of the building as we were coming out from the office out through the building. The ground shook and we heard, big boom. Looked over and saw a big ball of fire.
Flegel later told other people about the lights flickering.
I was in Atlanta and I was sitting there talking to another guy and I was explaining to him about whenever we were standing in the office and the lights flickered and everything. And as soon as he heard me say that, he immediately stopped me and he said, well, I'm retired from the Air Force. He said, that plane was shot down. And I said, why? And he said, because whenever the lights flickered, they zap the radar frequency on everything before they shoot.
The mayor of Indian Lake also remembers the power going off just before the crash.
Our power had gone off, and then we felt a tremor. It sounded like a missile across our house. I mean, it was going that fast.
The mayor of Shanksville, Ernie Schull, had something interesting to say. I know of 2 people, I will not mention names, that heard Schull say. They both lived very close, a couple of hundred yards. This one folks in Vietnam, and he said he was heard them. Who could have possibly shot the plane down? As far as we know, there are no witnesses who saw fighter jets near Flight 93 at the time of the crash. There are witnesses who saw
It was so smooth and it just glided right in. And then I'm done. And when I looked up again, then it
The debunker maintains there is no mystery behind the white plane. It was a corporate jet, they say, which air traffic controllers had asked to take a look on the ground after they realized they had lost Flight 93.
there was in fact a little white jet that was seen in the area after Flight 93 crashed. A number of witnesses saw it. It was a little Dassault Falcon.
Two idiots, yeah.
Flying from a nearby airport. And this once air traffic control knew they'd lost Flight 93, they asked the nearest aircraft to
No,
go to the area
great.
and actually bring them back exact coordinates for the crash site.
No.
Susan McElwain, however, remembers seeing the white plane before the crash, not after.
About 11:30 that night, the FBI came, wanted to talk to me. They kept asking me how big the plane was. I said the plane was small, wasn't much bigger than my van that I saw, and that it went over top of me.
Oh, that'd
And
be
I said, I wanted to
glass.
make sure maybe it was ours and not somebody else's. And then that's when he did seem to get a little nicer. Told me that it was a white Learjet. Someone was taking pictures. I said, before the crash. And he says, well, we gotta go.
John Flegel also saw the mysterious plane. Since Flegel arrived on the spot within a minute from the crash, the corporate jet sent by the air traffic controllers would not have had time to descend over the area yet, while the mystery plane was already getting away from the spot into the blue sky.
We got there, like I said, probably within 45 seconds or a minute of impact. We were there. We were there before any firemen, any paramedics, or anybody. We were on site. When we got there, there was a plane flying up above, and he was smart. He flew straight for the sun, so you couldn't look at it and see exactly what type of plane or if it was a fighter or what it was. But we caught a glimpse of it, and as he was swinging, basically traveling in the same direction as the plane.
If the plane was actually shot down, one big question arises. What are we to make of the heroic gesture by the passengers who chose to force the plane to the ground, we are told, in order to save the lives of other fellow countrymen? In truth, this heroic gesture by the passengers has been refuted by the 9/11 Commission itself. It was the hijackers who wrote the commission, and not the passengers who chose to intentionally crash the plane in Shanksville. The passengers never even made it into the cockpit. From the final report, we read, at 9:57, the passenger assault began. But for more than 5 minutes, writes the commission, the passengers were unable to break into the cockpit. After a while, as the outside attack continued, Jarrah asked, is that it? Shall we finish it off? A hijacker responded, no, not yet. When they all come, we finish it off. It should be noted that this dialogue was allegedly extracted from the cockpit voice recorder of Flight 93, but the actual recording, as we have said before, was never played in public. At 10:02, a hijacker said, pull it down, pull it down. The hijackers remained at the controls, but must have judged that the passengers were only seconds from overcoming them. The airplane headed down. The control wheel was turned hard to the right. The airplane rolled onto its back, and one of the hijackers began shouting, Allah is the greatest, Allah is the greatest. With the sound of the passenger counterattack continuing, the aircraft plowed into an empty field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania at 580 miles per hour, about 20 minutes flight time from Washington, D.C. Jarrah's objective, concludes the commission, was to crash the airliner into symbols of the American Republic, the Capitol, or the White House. Question. Given that they were only 20 minutes away from Washington, and for almost 6 minutes the passengers had been unable to enter the cockpit, why didn't the hijackers continue flying towards the Capitol? And even if they thought they couldn't make it to Washington, why didn't they try to crash the plane onto a small town nearby? Why crash the plane in an empty field where they knew they could not kill any more victims than those that were already on the plane with them? Maybe a less fictional explanation for Flight 93 is the one offered by Vernon Close, author and former NTSB investigator.
The role the government plays in times of stress, how they view the public, can the public stand the truth? Or shouldn't we need a legend at this point. We need a really neat story of reacting against such a dastardly act as was happening. So it's really nice and convenient to think of the Beamer story, let's roll. And that becomes just like, and it's just one of those legends. And I think there'll be a lot of pressure to let the legend stay.
We now summarize Flight 93. We have no proof that the terrorists boarded the plane, nor that they were ever in the cockpit. An alleged hijacker who would not have flown an airliner in the way that Flight 93 was flown. A false, concurrent hijacking that called the attention away from the real one. No proof whatsoever that Flight 93 crashed in the field near Shanksville. an extended
Yes,
debris field, which flatly disproves the official version of the crash and suggests that the plane broke up in midair instead. An unexplained small white jet leaving the area right after the impact. And the fact that the passengers who called from their cell phones could not have been on that plane to begin with, which strongly suggests that the revolt was a scripted, fictional event intended to fuel a prefabricated legend.
Well, have a drink for me. Cheers. Well, that one guy between that really it's a TV.
For most Americans, the destruction of the Twin Towers will remain embedded in their memories and their hearts as the epitome of horror, astonishment, and unjustified human suffering. But for some, it may have represented the moment where large corporate interests of global reach and cynical economic greed found the perfect place for a secret encounter. Common wisdom has it that the September 11 attacks destroyed two of the best jewels America has ever had. But exactly jewels, the Twin Towers, were not. While they sat on some of the most valuable real estate in the world, after 30 years, the Twin Towers had become obsolete. With each of the floors built as an open space of almost 1 acre in size, the rising cost of energy had made it extremely expensive to keep the buildings warm in winter and cool in summer. General maintenance was also very expensive compared to buildings from more recent years. In his 1999 book on the Twin Towers, Divided We Stand, author Eric Darton wrote, "When the World Trade Center was bombed in February 1993, it was already passing its prime as office space, overtaken by a generation of more recent, cybernetically smart buildings with higher ceilings and greater built-in electrical capacity. To maintain the Trade Center as Class A office space commanding top rents, the Port Authority would have had to spend $800 million rebuilding its electrical, electronic communications, and cooling systems. Furthermore, after the 1993 bombing, the tenancy had dropped dramatically, and it had been very hard to bring it back to normal levels. But the biggest problem with the Twin Towers was the large amount of asbestos they contained. Built in a time when the use of asbestos was still allowed in civil construction, at least 400 tons of this extremely dangerous material had been used to fireproof the steel structure of the buildings and to insulate hundreds of miles of piping for water, heating, and air conditioning. Asbestos was also present in the ceiling panels, the elevator shafts, and the vinyl tiles from office floors. From a property condition assessment of the Twin Towers dated December 2000, we read, according to Port Authority records, a total of 7 million square feet of vinyl asbestos floor tiles were installed in the World Trade Center. By the time asbestos was banned from civil construction, the Twin Towers were nearing their completion. Initially, the asbestos was encapsulated wherever possible to prevent the particles from being